real briefly, we're going to jump into chapter 11 tonight. Remember, the first 7 chapters of 1 Samuel, really we might even say chapter 8, are basically within the Judges period. Chapter 9, Saul is going to be told that he's going to be king. And really in chapter 10, Saul is going to be publicly announced as the new king. Chapter 11 will be pretty critical because it will be kind of the first kingly experience that Saul engages in. And so that's where we'll pick up tonight. Probably my favorite chapter in 1 Samuel, I say that, so far, is chapter 12, Samuel's farewell address. And so, Lord willing, we'll be able to get to that tonight as well. But of course, by chapter 8 or 9, we are in the United Kingdom period because we've had Saul anointed as the first king of Israel. Anything you want to say to jump in?
I don't think so.
All right, why don't you go ahead and take us through however far you want to.
All right, we're going to pick up in chapter 11 here. It says, Then Nahash the Ammonite came up and encamped against Jabesh-Gilead, and all the men of Jabesh said to Nahash, Make a covenant with us, and we will serve you. And Nahash the Ammonite answered them, On this condition I will make a covenant with you, that I may put out all your right eyes and bring a reproach on Israel. So I think it's interesting here that we have Nahash, an Ammonite, as encamped against Israel, and Israel don't inquire of the Lord in any form or fashion. They don't send for Samuel. They don't try to get up with Saul immediately, and the Lord's anointed. They don't do any of that, and they just say, "Hey, we'll make a covenant with you." But Nahash's terms for that covenant is that he wants to put out all their right eyes. And so from what I understand of that would be their dominant eye, and that would kind of cripple them in battle. So you probably wouldn't be able to shoot a bow and things of that nature. And probably even swinging a sword. If you block one side, you're kind of vulnerable on that side, especially if that's your dominant side that you would be attacking with.
I read something that said they used a shield in their left hand, so they would have it up high to guard their head. So you're blind in both eyes, basically, if you put out your right eye.
That makes sense.
Or you have no shield, which is almost as bad.
Yeah.
Let me just point out on the map here, this is Jabesh-Gilead, or where Jabesh-Gilead is. Gilead basically refers to anything in this area. So a lot of times there will be a town that has the same name over on the other side, so they'll label it as Jabesh-Gilead so you know where it is. And Nahash is from here, or Nahash is from Ammon. The name Nahash means serpent or snake. And there are other Nahashes in the Bible, and there's not sure if they're all the same sometimes, or if it's like a title that's kind of handed down and passed down. But here you have Nahash the Ammonite. Remember, the Ammonites were descendants of Lot. So these people are not too far distantly related, and they're coming against him. And I think, as Alan said, it almost seems like Jabesh-Gilead just kind of rolls over. So we're going to see some more of that beginning in verse 3 and how they hope to address this situation. But he's right that they're basically like, look, just make a treaty with us and we'll call it square. But you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I can. Then the elders of Jabesh said to him, Hold off for 7 days, that we may send messengers to all the territories of Israel, and then, if there is no one to save us, we will come out to you. So the messengers came to Gibeah of Saul, and told the news in the hearing of the people. And all the people lifted up their voices and wept. Now there was Saul coming behind the herd from the field, and Saul said, What troubles the people, that they weep? And they told him the words of the men of Jabesh. Then the Spirit of God came upon Saul when he heard this news, and his anger was greatly aroused. So he took a yoke of oxen and cut them into pieces and sent them throughout all the territory of Israel by the hands of messengers, saying, Whoever does not go out with Saul and Samuel to battle, so it shall be done to his oxen. And the fear of the Lord fell on the people, that they may come out with one consent. So here, the elders don't like the offer that Nahash gives. So they say, let us have 7 days and let us send out and see if anybody will help us in this. And then if not, we'll consent to what you've offered here. And so the word gets to Saul, and when we see Saul here, you think, well, he's been anointed king. What's he doing out in the field working livestock? And so, as far as I'm aware, there's not a palace yet. He went back to his normal life, I'm assuming, but he had some mighty men that went with him because he was anointed king. And so here he's still farming like he was before. But then it says that he takes, the Spirit of the Lord comes upon him, and then he's angered about this, and he takes his oxen and cuts them up and sends them across the territories. When was the last time we seen something like this? So the Levite's concubine, they cut her up and sent her out to get everybody kind of on the same page and together how serious this was. Right. And so, from what I understand, an oxen in this time would be like a tractor today. That's something very precious, especially for the work of what Saul's doing here in farming and stuff. So he's saying, I'm sending this out, and everybody needs to come together and band together. And if you don't come, we're going to do this to your oxen. And so this was a very serious matter here.
So you mentioned cutting up the Levite's concubine and sending her in connection to oxen. It's not the only connection to that story here, right? What city did that happen in? Do you remember? Well, Jabesh Gilead is connected. Gibeah. So that's where Saul is from. So this city is the city where that happened. How does Jabesh Gilead connect? Anybody remember? You remember they mount up for war. They kill almost all the Benjaminites. That's where they got the women from, right? So Mr. Mike was mentioning this after services Sunday night, and I didn't think about this part of it. I'd known this connection, but he said, I wonder if Saul might have been related to somebody from Jabesh Gilead, right? Because that's where all the women came from. And so there is a connection, and I think we're supposed to hear those connections as we're reading this story, because what you have is it's kind of an echo of things that had happened during the Judges period, and some of the language even that happens with Saul. The Spirit rushed on him, which you're going to talk about in just a second, I'm sure. But that sounds like Samson language, right? And there's other things here that kind of are bits and pieces of things that other judges had done that are kind of all put together in Saul. And one thing I read is that he's kind of a super judge, right? And so rather than being kind of over one tribal area, he's uniting all of Israel. And that's what's at work here is the Spirit of the Lord. But I just think it's interesting, those connections. When Gibeah is mentioned in the Judges, it's so wicked that I don't like talking about it in mixed company, right? I don't like talking about it in any company mixed up, right? It's just absolutely horrific. And here it's so in one sense, Jabesh Gilead suffered because of the wickedness of Gibeah in the Judges period. Here, salvation is going to come from Gibeah for Jabesh Gilead. Maybe that's a redemption story. Maybe that's a story of what God can do with people. Even that we're almost exterminated, basically. Anyway.
And I think we mentioned last time that it mentioned that Saul would restrain the people. And in Romans 13:4, it's talking about the government there, and it says, for he, talking about the government, is God's minister to you for good, but if you do evil, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain. For he is God's minister, an avenger to execute wrath on him who practices evil. And so that could be applied here to Saul. And he's sending out warning. Like, if you don't come and do what's right, then we're going to use the sword against your oxen here.
Yeah, and I think that Saul is noteworthy here. I think he's doing good here. I think he's doing exactly what he was supposed to do in this. So, and I think we'll see more commendable things about Saul in chapter 11, which maybe in some ways makes the downfall all the sadder. All right. I'll pick up, that's okay?
That's fine.
Let's see, where are we? Verse 9?
8.
Okay.
Yes,
so when he mustered them at Bezek, the people of Israel were 300,000 and the men of Judah 30,000. The fact they're mentioned separately maybe is that there's a division, that maybe they were not as united under Saul. This is going to be the ultimate division that occurs, but it's kind of strange to number Judah out separately here. But I think there's probably evidence even before this of Judah not always being exactly in line, or maybe it's the other tribes not being in line with Judah. Maybe we'd say it that way. Anyway, they said to the messengers who had come, thus you shall say to the men of Jabesh Gilead, tomorrow, by the time the sun is hot, you shall have salvation. When the messengers came and told the men of Jabesh, they were glad. Therefore, the men of Jabesh said, tomorrow we will give ourselves up to you, that is Nahash, and you may do whatever seems good to you. And the next day, Saul put the people in 3 companies, and they came into the midst of the camp in the morning watch, that would be between like 2 and 6 a.m., and struck down the Ammonites until the heat of the day. And those who survived were scattered, so that no 2 of them left together. So basically, what it seems to me like is happening is that the men of Jabesh say, Nahash, we haven't found anybody. Sorry to delay you 7 days. By tomorrow, we'll just resign ourselves to this, which would take his guard down, right? Do what? Yeah, it's a setup, right? It's, he might have sent guys home. I don't know, like this is, we got this in the bag, fellas. And then at 2 in the morning, between 2 and 6 in the morning, here they come rushing in 3 companies. That kind of reminds you of Gideon. And like I said, I think there's elements of some other judge stories that we see reappear here. The fact that there's 300,000 and 30,000, which makes 330,000, kind of is like a super number of Gideon's 300 that will go against the. I think maybe we're hearing echoes there. And then they're scattered in very much the same way that the Midianites were scattered when Gideon attacked them. Anything through verse 11?
No, I don't have anything there.
Okay, sure. Anybody else? Anything through 11? Anything interesting that you'd like? Yeah. Yeah. Love weird questions. I think Nahash didn't think they'd find anybody. I mean, and so, yeah, it is odd. So that's a good question. We don't get a lot of information about it. Nahash wants to embarrass Israel here. Notice that in verse 2, and thus bring disgrace on all Israel. And I wonder if he's just so arrogant about the condition of Israel right now. Israel's in pretty bad shape, right, at the end of the Judges period. And they're disjointed and they're not unified. And I think that is kind of behind the threat that Saul has to make about what's going to happen to people's oxen. I really don't think he thinks that Jabesh Gilead is going to find anybody on the other side of the Jordan that's going to help him. And so I think probably arrogance. But there may be something else at work there. He wouldn't have expected that wake-up call in the middle of the night. I know that. So.
Outside of the concubine situation, Israel has been divided throughout
That's right.
the time of the Judges.
Yep.
We haven't seen them as a cohesive unit.
Yeah.
Like I said, outside of that one instance.
That's right.
But the rest of the time, it was, villages and certain smaller areas were fighting their own battles.
Yes, I agree. And if there was a division in the tribes on the west side of the Jordan, I imagine the gap between the tribes on the east side of the Jordan versus the west side of the Jordan was even greater. And we don't get a lot of description or depiction of that. But if there's division within all of the left side tribes, then the division between the left and the right side would have to have been really significant. But there is the connection between Gibeah and Jabesh Gilead, and maybe that has some part to play here. But really, I think the thing that's at work is that God's Spirit is with Saul. And remember it said that the fear of the Lord fell upon the people, maybe in part because that's the threat that Saul made, right? I don't know that it has to be some kind of miraculous fear that falls on them. I think it's the Lord caused fear to fall on them because now he's got a guy who's rallying the troops in an effective way. Kind of thing. Okay, go ahead.
And just, I think it's interesting the fact that they say, when the sun gets hot or whatever, like midday, you'll have this answer, and they're all defeated by that time of the day. That's good. It's interesting.
Can I make a quick comment?
Yep.
So I feel like that this is just me, but maybe it's true for someone else as well. I feel like I've not made enough of the fact that Saul, multiple times even at this point, has had the Spirit of the Lord upon him, right?
So when he was prophesying in chapter 9 and 10, yes.
And so we've had this happen multiple times. I feel like maybe with other people in the Bible, I'll look at it and go, oh, look, this is a notable thing. And I'm not that much with Saul. It's interesting. So we will see a very specific place where a transition occurs, right? So where he has the Spirit of the Lord, and he doesn't. And what's interesting is that I think sometimes we may look at this kind of language and say, oh, well, God is just imposing something on him. It's like, well, when you notice where this happens, it's after something Saul has done. Right?
Yeah.
It's not after something that God has done. He's not just imposing this on Saul without Saul's will. But it's something Saul has done. But I think here he's trying to help Saul with the Spirit. He's trying to So we talk about rallying the people together. I think all of this he's trying to give Saul aid. It's not until Saul does something to change the relationship that things change with God's Spirit.
Yeah, so the Spirit would be empowering and equipping, but it's not taking it out of Saul's control of his willingness to do this or not.
And it's not necessarily everlasting either.
That's a good point too. Very good. Yeah. And we have some of that same language with Samson, but the Spirit of the Lord rushing up. And we kind of see ups and downs with Samson too. Maybe interesting that it is characters that we would like question significant moments in their life who have this empowering from the Lord. And other people are said to have it too that we would consider more faithful along the way, but it is interesting.
I guess I just don't think Saul.
Yeah, like a Spirit-filled guy. Not much, but he was. That's right. You want to take us to the end of the chapter?
Yeah. Then the people said to Samuel, Who is he who said, Shall Saul reign over us? Bring the men that we may put them to death. But Saul said, Not a man shall be put to death this day, for today the Lord has accomplished salvation in Israel. Then Samuel said to the people, Come, let's go to Gilgal and renew the kingdom there. So all the people went to Gilgal, and there they made Saul king before the Lord in Gilgal. There they made sacrifices of peace offerings before the Lord, and there Saul and all the men of Israel rejoiced greatly. So here we see, and it seems like it never fails in human nature. You have something really good happen, and then, well, here comes somebody complaining about that. And so if you remember last class, when they anointed Saul king, there was men saying, well, why is he going to reign over us? And they're upset about that. And so now that Saul that has a victory here, there are people speak up. And it's like, well, where's those men that said they didn't want him as king? You know, look how successful he is now. Let's put those men to death. And Saul doesn't allow that to happen. He says that for the Lord has accomplished salvation in Israel today. And so he's not really worried about that. That's not in his interest here. And then they go up to Gilgal and renew the kingdom there. What are your thoughts on that in renewing the kingdom?
That's a good question. Did any of y'all have any concept or maybe idea behind the idea of renewing the kingdom? Yeah, go ahead.
I have a note that just says 1 Samuel 11:12 starts the period of United Kingdoms.
Okay, yeah, good. So I think the curious thing is that word renew, right? Because it really isn't a kingdom in the traditional sense before this. So why would you say renew?
Does that word mean kingdom and not just nation?
Yeah, I think that's true. I think yes. I think there is a question of what's happening here. The best answer that I have come across is that it is a recommitment to God as king. So 1 Samuel 8:7, they've rejected me as king. In 1 Samuel 12 and verse 12, let's see here. And when you saw that Nahash, the king of the Ammonites, came against you, you said to me, No, but a king shall reign over us when the Lord your God was your king. So that seems to me to be an emphasis by Samuel to say, you have rejected, we're gonna refresh this, we're gonna get this restarted. And I think the fact that Samuel is doing this, I think maybe is an indication that there's a spiritual aspect to what's happening here. Let's renew the kingdom. Why at Gilgal? So there's several questions that I have when I come to this one paragraph. Why Gilgal? I think it's possible that that's where the tabernacle is at that moment. Because he says there they made Saul king before the Lord. So Gilgal here is on the map. You also, does anybody remember Gilgal from the conquest period? What happens there at Gilgal? Anybody remember? It is kind of the first place that they come to right after they cross. Joshua 3 and 4. That's where they observe circumcision. I believe it's where the manna stops. And I believe it's where, do they observe the Passover there once before they move forward? So I think that's right.
Isn't it where they set up the 12 stones as well?
It's where they set up the 12 stones, at least somewhere right there close. So I think Gilgal makes sense as a place like, hey, let's have a restart. Because that's where they started the first time. And I think that's the idea, is we're recommitting to God as king here. So that first question is, renew? What? Second question is, why Gilgal? And the third question is, they made Saul king. I thought he's already king. I think there was a sense in which he was like pointed out as going to be king, and he had been like maybe think about like our election and our inauguration, right? He had been appointed as king, but he really hadn't been inaugurated. He hadn't been installed. The Septuagint, I've mentioned the Septuagint before, is the Greek translation of the Hebrew Old Testament, uses the word anointed there instead of made. And I don't know if that's the right word there, but Brother Waldron in his commentary on 1st and 2nd Samuel says that he is made king in a way where it's like there's a unity behind him now with gratitude and devotion to him because of what he's just done. It looks like, as Alan May mentioned at the very beginning of class, he is made king, but he's not operating as king in any real official capacity. Now he will. Now he'll be in charge. And so it's kind of moving from like an appointed position or an appointed notion to an enforced, inaugurated, installed position. And I think that's the difference. Then when we come to chapter 12, I think all that is happening at Gilgal. And I think that gives us a sense of what he means to renew the kingdom, which we'll see in just a second.
That renews their verse 12, where there were people that were against Saul.
Yeah.
Now then we're going to unite these people together with everybody else.
Yes, that's right.
Let everybody know the king.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. Yes. Yeah, I'm trying to think of a parallel for that. I don't know that I really care. But I'll think about it. But I think that's right. I think he goes. It's weird for us to think about a time where Israel's not united as a kingdom. But I think basically Saul's appointed, but the tribes are still so independent that it's like, okay, so Saul is king. What would that change about our day-to-day life? Not much. Now it may change something. Right? Now it may be a stronger monarchical position. Yes, sir.
So I just want to make a couple of points that are kind of connected, but they're also separate. So we talked about how even the way they phrase it here, who is it that said, shall Saul reign over us? Mm-hmm. And so it's like, well, let's bring these people who rejected Saul. But what's interesting is their original question was, how can Saul save us? Mm-hmm. Right? Well, and now we see how Saul saves. But what's even better is that Saul tells them how he was able to save them. Mm-hmm. Right? And so it's not Saul's right? So this is actually a great question. It's like, how is Saul able to save us? Well, it's because the Lord gave us this victory, right? And the people need to know that. That's something that, like we're talking about here, that shows united is the fact that they cannot victory in the war. Mm-hmm. And so really it's a great question to have before, and the fact that Saul brings it up in people's... Yeah. Yeah, let me ask this. If all we had of Saul's reign was through chapter 11, how would you feel about Saul?
Great king.
I feel pretty good about it, right? He is angry when these people are threatened by Nahash. The Spirit of the Lord rushes on him. He is good at rallying the people. I mean, he threatens a little violence, but sometimes you got to do that, I guess, to get people to go fight against Nahash. You know, so he gets them all together. When he wins, he is not interested in personal vindictive vengeance, and he gives credit for the victory to God. It's a pretty compelling character so far, and I think until chapter 13, that's the vision we're left of Saul. So I will say this, that I think the story of Samuel of the book of Samuel is a decline of Saul and a rise of David. But in order for Saul to decline, I think he has to start off on a pretty high note, and that makes me kind of not as critical of like him hiding among the baggage. I think the picture of him is pretty positive through chapter 11, even if I'm not quite sure what's going on there. I'm not inclined to just be real hard on him in that, but maybe he should have been. Maybe I should be. Okay. Anything else through chapter 11?
You know, I think it's to his credit that he doesn't want to execute these rebels, whatever you may want to call them.
I agree.
Because, I mean, how many kings are going to put up with any kind of rebellion for any amount of time? Right. You know, that's what you want to remove from the camp immediately. Mm-hmm. Is people that might try to establish a coup or whatever. You know, those kind of threats kings always take seriously. Here, yeah. Saul has a whole different attitude.
That's right. Very good.
Well, and I think because God didn't say, "Hey, okay, we're going to take care of these people," I think it's some of the reason why you don't have Saul carrying that out. And the text doesn't say whether he said, well, let's inquire of the Lord about this or not. He just said the Lord is given salvation in Israel today.
You know, he seems to want to keep everything to a positive.
Right.
You know, enough bloodshed for today. You know, we've had victory. Let's keep everything positive. Move it positive.
Amen. I think that's right.
Well, the other thing is, you know, as we're reading all these different chapters, God actually paraphrased them, because if he actually told us all the details that actually transpired from Genesis to now, we ain't got enough books to hold.
True.
Just like they said, if all the testimony that Christ did in his years of preaching, there's not enough books to hold it, but God he gives us enough, even through all this, that we can know the basic facts, and that it gives us encouragement, and also knowing that what God is telling us, that he's always faithful. It don't matter what goes down, he gives us the choice to do right, but his will at the end is going to come out, no matter what the decisions is made.
That's right. Okay. Anything else? All right. So let's look at chapter 12. Let me just I'm going to survey, and then I'll let you, if you don't mind, go through kind of more detail. So I think we've got 3 sections here. I think the first section is about Samuel, and the conclusion is Samuel has been faithful. The second section basically starts in verses 6 and following, and the question there is about the Lord. It's about Yahweh, and the conclusion is Yahweh has been faithful. The third section really kind of starts in verse 13 and following, and now behold the king you have chosen. Here the question is going to be about Israel and her king, and now it's going to be about faithful, but it's going to be a question mark. So Samuel's been faithful, Yahweh's been faithful, will Israel be faithful? That's the question that leads them. And I think it's a really powerful section, because basically it reviews the good things that God has done, the rightness of God in all of his actions, and then kind of lays it out before Israel and says, okay, what are you going to do with this? It's reminiscent of Joshua 23 and 24. It's reminiscent of Deuteronomy. Here's what God has done. Here's what he expects. What are you going to do in view of that? And so I think it's worth our time to look at this. Alan, you want to take us through some of that?
Yeah. Now Samuel said to all Israel, indeed I have heeded your voice in all that you said to me, and have made a king over you. And now here is the king, walking before you. And I am old and gray-headed, and look, my sons are with you. I have walked before you from my childhood to this day. Here I am, witness against me before the Lord and before his anointed. Whose ox have I taken, or whose donkey have I taken, or whom have I cheated? Whom have I oppressed, or from whose hand have I received any bribe with which to blind my eyes? I will restore it to you. And they said, you have not cheated us or suppressed us, nor have you taken anything from any man's hand. Then he said to them, the Lord is witness against you, and his anointed is witness this day, that you have not found anything in my hand. And they answered, he is witness. And so here, at least it seems to me that Samuel's trying to reaffirm, probably to himself and to the people, that he's done his job. That he's not, and you know, you kind of get the idea when they ask for a king, Samuel's like, well, am I not doing my job? You know, he feels rejected in that. And God tells Samuel that they didn't reject you, they've rejected me as king. But I think still, in doing that type of work, when you feel that way, you want some more affirmation. You know, have I done you wrong in any form or fashion? And they say, no, you've not done that. And he said, well, good. Let the Lord be witness of that. I still think that probably bothered him in the back of his mind, even though God said what he did. You know, it's not about you that they're rejecting me. I think still him caring about the people and about his work, that would eat away at him. And so I think he's just wanting some affirmation.
Yeah, he said, have I taken? The answer was no, when exactly that's what exactly a king was going to come do. They were going to take. He's like, look, you rejected me, and God says, it's not you, it's me. But Samuel says, I have not been what this king is going to be to you.
Right.
All right, anything through verse 5?
You know, the people should already seen that by, you know, even though they wanted a king like the earthly kings that let them do whatever they wanted to. But they ought to have been listening to the people talk about, yeah, they come in and took half my cattle and half my sheep.
Yeah, they saw what they wanted to see, right? They saw a king who could deliver them from battle, but they didn't see a king who was conscripting their sons. And it's like, yeah, you know, the government can do all kinds of things for you, but where's it getting the resources to do that, right? It doesn't just come out of thin air, you know. It comes from the people. So, all right, very good. Chapter 12, verse 6. And Samuel said to the people, the Lord is witness, who appointed Moses and Aaron and brought your fathers up out of the land of Egypt. Now therefore stand still, that I may plead with you before the Lord concerning all the righteous deeds of the Lord that he performed for you and your fathers. When Jacob went into Egypt and the Egyptians oppressed them, then your fathers cried out to the Lord, and the Lord sent Moses and Aaron, who brought your fathers out of Egypt and made them dwell in this place. But they forgot the Lord their God. And he sold them in the hand of Sisera, commander of the army of Hatzor, and into the hand of the Philistines, and into the hand of the king of Moab, and they fought against them. And they cried out to the Lord and said, we have sinned because we have forsaken the Lord and have served the Baals and the Ashtaroth. But now deliver us out of the hand of our enemies that we may serve you. And the Lord sent Jerubbaal, and Barak, and Jephthah, and Samuel, and delivered you out of the hand of your enemies on every side, and you lived in safety. I want to pause there for just a second. Samuel points to earlier oppressions, and what does he say God had done in all of those things? Saved them, rescued them, right? So Egypt, God rescued them, but they forgot him. These other nations oppressed them, so he sent Jerubbaal, or Gideon, as we know him better. The King James Version says Bedan in the place of Barak, but I think it is talking about Barak there. Jephthah, Samuel. Samuel is mentioned here as a military deliverer in some sense, so that's interesting. God had always been faithful to deliver them out of their oppression. But as we look at the book of Judges, what did that require? Repentance. They had to turn back to it. I think that's kind of the crux of the matter here. So as we look at verses 12 and following, we're going to see they're going to take a different tact when Nahash is threatening them. They want to do something different rather than come to God. Verse 12, when you saw that Nahash, the king of the Ammonites, came against you, you said to me, no, but a king shall reign over us when the Lord your God was king. They came to God, or came to Samuel and said, we need somebody to deliver us. And Samuel says, you had somebody to deliver you. Look at all these examples over and over and over. God always saw fit to deliver you. But this time it was different. You had a king. Your problem was rebellion. Your problem was that you had a king and you didn't want him to be your king. And so I think basically they wanted deliverance without repentance. I think that's the issue here. All right, you want to take us 13 and follow?
Yeah. Now therefore, here is the king whom you have chosen and whom you have desired. And take note that the Lord has set a king over you. If you fear the Lord and serve him and obey his voice and do not rebel against the commandment of the Lord, then both you and the king who reigns over you will continue following the Lord your God. However, if you do not obey the voice of the Lord, but rebel against the commandment of the Lord, then the hand of the Lord will be against you as it was against your fathers. And so here, he's just reaffirming, if you follow God, it almost seems like if you follow God, you'll be able to continue following God. He will not defeat you. But if you turn against him, he is going to be against you just as he was your fathers. And that should be pretty fresh on these people's minds about how all the oppression and stuff that's happened in the book of the Judges. They should have lived through at least some of that. Maybe not all of it, depending on how it fell. But they should know good and well, if we don't serve God, he's going to send somebody in and destroy us. And that's happened time and time again in their history. So they should know that it's really going to be that way.
Yeah, maybe they thought a king, well, this will keep us from having to go through all that turning back to God business. And basically what he's saying is a king doesn't remove the need for repentance.
Right.
It's going to be, the terms are the same.
And later on, they'll feel the same way about a temple.
That's right. Yes, you're exactly right. That's good.
And also, too, you can do that in comparison to today. I mean, Christ is our king And we're supposed to give him total allegiance, just like you done in the sermon this morning about God and Christ. But God has put Christ over the church as the head. But if we don't submit to him everything to do what he's done told us to do, we're actually going against the king.
That's right. Very good.
We'll pick up in 16 there. It says, Now therefore stand and see this great thing which the Lord will do before your eyes. Is today not the wheat harvest? I will call to the Lord, and he will send thunder and rain, that you may perceive and see that your wickedness is great, which you have done in the sight of the Lord, in asking a king for yourselves. So Samuel called to the Lord, and the Lord sent thunder and rain that day, and all the people greatly feared the Lord and Samuel. And all the people said to Samuel, Pray for your servants to the Lord your God, that we may not die, for we have added to all our sins the evil of asking a king for ourselves. And so just as miracles in the New Testament affirmed what someone was saying, this miracle here is affirming what he says is true. And how they felt about it before, I don't really know as a whole. I guess they didn't realize what they were doing, maybe, even though they've been told. But in this miracle here that God performs through Samuel, they understand, and they say, Please pray for us. And they greatly feared the Lord, which is the best state that they can be in. So they're obedient in that. Do you have anything you want to add there?
Yeah, just a couple of notes. The wheat harvest, he says, is weird. Evidently, it would have been sometime between like April and June, and a big rain and thunder and all that would have been out of season. It would have been a very rare event. And so for Samuel to say that this is going to happen right now, it would have been quite the sign for that to occur. And I think maybe it demonstrates that God has a lot of power at his disposal. So take note, that if you doubt God's ability to bring judgment on you, Samuel here is both demonstrating that he's telling the truth, but also that God is very capable of bringing them down, and maybe that's what that strikes the fear into them. And so it's, anything through, what would you go through? 19? Anything through 19? I think it is good that the people see their failure here in asking for a king. I don't know how sincere they are about it, but they seem scared, so maybe they are.
So what you're saying is that even though they have a king now, an earthly king, they can't feel secure in that, and they still need to trust in the Lord.
That's exactly right.
He's the possessor of all things.
Yeah. One, that the king was not an ideal solution to the situation, that it actually was a rejection of God. And two, that if they think that this is going to keep them from having to be obedient to God, they're wrong, because now both them and their king are going to be under they're under the covenant, and they're going to be held accountable for that too. All right, so let's come to verse 20. And verse 20 almost seems to be a kind of a shift in the way that Samuel is approaching. So notice he says, Samuel said to the people, Do not be afraid. Well, that was maybe, I think, the point of the thunder and lightning in some sense to kind of strike through. But do not be afraid. You have done all this evil. Yet do not turn aside from following the Lord, but serve the Lord with all your heart. And do not turn aside after empty things that cannot profit or deliver, for they are empty. For the Lord will not forsake his people for his great name's sake, because it has pleased the Lord to make you a people for himself. Moreover, as for me, far be it from me that I should sin against the Lord by ceasing to pray for you, and I will instruct you in the good and the right way. Only fear the Lord and serve him faithfully with all your heart, for consider what great things he has done for you. But if you still do wickedly, you shall be swept away, both you and your king. All right. So it seems to me that what Samuel is saying is, yes, you have done wrong, but God is gracious even in that rejection. And the right answer here is not to be so afraid that you fail to do what God has called you to do, but that you follow him and that you serve him with all your heart. Very Deuteronomy-like language here. Serve him with all your heart. And so don't turn aside after these nothings, these empty things, which are nothing. The end of verse 21. Don't turn after these nothings because they're nothing. There's no profit. There's no deliverance in them. This is the call to abstain from idolatry. And because you have the confidence that God is invested in you because He has put His name on it. He has made you His treasured people. He's not going to abandon you. He's not going to forsake you because you are wearing His name. And I think we see that in the book of Judges, that God would not abandon or forsake them, that He was going to preserve them as His people. And so, in addition to that, Samuel says, and if God's not going to forsake you, far be it from me to forsake you. So he would continue to teach them. He would continue to pray for them and intercede for them. He felt rejected, but he would still pray to God for them. He would still try to direct them in the good and right way. And I think I think Samuel here is a reflection of godlike character. Here, Samuel feels rejected, but he is going to do good for them and be there for them. God is rejected. He's going to do good for them and be there for them as well. He says, but you've got to serve Him. You've got to be faithful. And notice in verse 24 and 25, fear the Lord and serve Him faithfully with all your heart. Why? What's the first reason? Consider what? The good things He's done for you. One motivation for serving God faithfully is all the good things He's done for you. Then look at verse 25. But if you still do wickedly, what will happen? You'll be swept away. The second motivation for faithfulness to God is judgment. So I'm always reminded in passages like this of Romans 11:22. Behold the goodness and the severity of God. If you are recognizing what God has done for you in a positive way, that's a motivation for faithfulness. But if that's not enough, just think about what He'll do if you're not faithful, and that's a motivation for faithfulness. And you'll be swept away, both you and your king. No king could save them if they weren't faithful to the Lord. In fact, the king would be swept away too. And he's not going to be a deliverer. I think all of this points to the fact that their real problem, their real danger was not people like Nahash the Ammonite. Their real threat was not external. It was spiritual. It was internal. If they were faithful to the Lord, there wouldn't be an external threat that could take them. But if they weren't right on the inside, any external threat would do, right? Any external threat God could use to bring them down. And so I think that maybe that is a lesson for us, that oftentimes we think our greatest problem is circumstances, when our greatest concern ought to be faithfulness to the Lord. And if we're not faithful to the Lord, then any circumstance can ruin us. But if we're faithful to Him, then no circumstance will stand. Anything through 25? All right, so I will not be here Wednesday night. At least that's the plan. And so Austin has agreed to step in my place, and so he and Alan are going to take you through 13 and 14, I believe, which will be great. I'm looking forward to hearing that after, or hearing that Wednesday. Any comments or questions before we go? All right, very good. Right on time.
Thanks for watching. If you found this video to be beneficial, please follow us on Facebook or subscribe to our YouTube channel. Feel free to share it with others that you feel like may benefit from it. If you need to contact us, please contact us via email at quinn.church@yahoo.com. Also, if you're in the area, we would love for you to come visit with us at one of our assemblies. Have a good day.